She called CPS on my family while I was hooked up to hospital monitors. And when I confronted her, she admitted it like she was proud of it. She had reached out to me. Just a few words that she loved me, that she'd been thinking about me. And when I told her I had a question, that I needed her to be honest with me, she called immediately. She opened the conversation by saying she thought I already knew the answer. And then she said it, calmly, almost defiantly. I think you already know if you're asking. So yes, it was me, my sister, my Santa's helper. The woman who had spent every Christmas Eve in my home for years, building toys beside me in the middle of the night, eating at my table, watching my children grow up. She had called Child Protective Services and told them my husband was a violent alcoholic with serious anger issues, told them we were starving our 3 children, told them there was no food in the house. She made that call while I was recovering from 3 seizures, while I couldn't drive, while I couldn't work, while I was sitting in a neurologist's office trying to figure out what was happening inside my own brain and holding my family together at the same time. When the CPS worker arrived and toured our home, she laughed, literally laughed. She said our pantry had enough food to feed everyone in the house for 3 months. The case was closed within days. My husband doesn't have an anger problem. My children are not starving. The accusations weren't just false, they were transparently, almost embarrassingly false. But here is the thing about false accusations. Even when they are disproven, they leave something behind. They leave the image of a CPS worker pulling your 13-year-old son out of class to ask him whether his parents are hurting him. They leave a version of your life that someone else invented and handed to a government agency. This is the story of what happens when jealousy, grief, and alcohol converge inside someone you love completely, and what happens when karma doesn't bother waiting. To understand what makes this betrayal so devastating, you first have to understand what my sister was to me before any of this happened. We grew up close. Not in the polished, performative way that families sometimes present to the world, genuinely, deeply close. The kind of closeness where someone knows the layout of your house by heart, where your kids call out to them without prompting when they walk through the front door, where their presence at your table feels as natural as anything in your life. Every year, without exception, she would come to our house on Christmas Eve with her fiancé. Not for Christmas morning, for the night before. For the setup. She and I would stay up past midnight assembling toys, arranging things under the tree, making sure Christmas morning looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. We called ourselves Santa's helpers. It was one of my favorite traditions in the world, that particular combination of exhaustion and joy, staying up late with your sister making sure your children wake up to something they'll remember. My husband and I have 3 kids. A 13-year-old son who is fully, wonderfully, exhaustingly in the middle of his teenage years. The sighs, the eye rolls, the selective hearing, the slammed doors, and a 3-year-old daughter who still believes in everything. Santa. Magic. The whole thing. There is a particular sweetness to that phase of early childhood, and I was fiercely protective of it in the way that parents of young children tend to be. I also want you to understand what kind of household we run, because it matters enormously for what comes later. I cook dinner for my children every single night. We do not order out. There is always food in our home, real food, prepared food, food that comes from effort and intention and love. That is not a brag. It is the truth. It is relevant because of what someone decided to tell a government agency about us. This Christmas Eve, my sister and her fiancé arrived like they always had. I had no reason to think it would be any different. I had every reason to believe this was just one more quiet, warm night in a long line of them. I was wrong about that. Here is what you need to understand about parenting a teenager. It is not one dramatic moment. It is 1,000 small moments of friction stacked on top of each other. The sighs, the eye rolls, the pretending not to hear you, the pretending not to know how to do something they have done 100 times. My son is a fundamentally good kid. His teachers know him, like him, and have noticed the same patterns we work on at home. The pushback, the arguing, the theatrics when asked to do something simple. It's developmental. It is normal. And it is also our job to address it consistently and with love, and we do. Our discipline style sits somewhere between tough love and genuine dialogue. When my son acts out, and when he does, it usually follows the same pattern. He argues, escalates, retreats upstairs, slams his door. My husband's move is to give him exactly 10 minutes, and then go upstairs and have a real conversation. Not a lecture, a dialogue, one where my son is heard and also understands what the behavior looked like from the outside. It works. It has always worked. It is, in my opinion, exactly the kind of parenting that grows a real human being. On Christmas Eve, my son did something that crossed a line in a way I felt clearly. In front of his 3-year-old sister, he told her Santa wasn't real. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Christmas Eve, the very night we had stayed up for years making magical for our kids, in front of a toddler who still believed completely with her whole heart. My husband and I both responded immediately. We told him that was unkind, that it wasn't okay, that there were better ways to handle whatever he was feeling. He argued with us. He ran upstairs. He slammed his door. 10 minutes later, my husband went upstairs. They talked. My son came back down, apologized to his sister, and went to bed. My sister and her fiancé were present for this entire sequence. They said nothing. They didn't pull me aside. They showed no concern. The night continued exactly as it always had. When I went to bed that night, I believed everything was fine. I had absolutely no idea what was already in motion. January arrived. The lights came down. My son went back to school, and my body, which had apparently decided December was the appropriate time to stage a full revolt, was still making demands on my attention that I could not ignore. I have a seizure disorder. I've had it for years. For the last decade, it had been completely under control, no episodes, just monitoring and medication and the quiet daily relief of a condition that had agreed to stay in the background. Then December happened and the background came forward. I had 3 seizures, back to back to back, after 10 years of silence. My neurologist needed a full workup, an EEG sleep study, tests to understand why a decade of stability had collapsed in a single month, and the practical consequences were immediate and enormous. I could not drive for 6 months, which meant I could not work, which meant the entire infrastructure of our household, who gets where, who picks up who, how the days are managed, had to be completely rebuilt around my limitations. That is not a small adjustment. That is a fundamental restructuring of a life. And I was doing it while exhausted, frightened, and wired up to hospital equipment, trying to keep my fear quiet enough that my kids wouldn't carry it. Now hold all of that in your mind, because here is what was happening at exactly the same time. Completely without my knowledge, my 13-year-old son was being pulled out of his classroom by a child protective services worker. A government official sat across from my child and asked him questions about his home life, whether he felt safe, how his parents treated him. He was 13 years old and had no idea why this was happening. He told her the truth. He said he loved his parents. He described being grounded, having electronics taken away, standard discipline, and he said that when we disciplined him, he understood it was because we loved him and wanted him to learn. He was calm. He was composed. He went home that afternoon and immediately told my husband that a woman had come to talk to him at school. He was confused, so were we. We didn't know it yet, but someone had been planning this for weeks. I was in my neurologist's office, post-tests, bone-tired, running on a thin thread of functional energy, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was the CPS worker. She would be coming to my home the very next day to interview us and to interview my 3-year-old daughter. I could not even call her back in that moment. I was in the middle of medical appointments. I forwarded the number to my husband and told him to handle it, because I genuinely could not. I want you to hold that detail, a woman so depleted from neurological testing that she cannot make a phone call, and consider that someone who knew her, loved her, had been in her home on Christmas Eve, chose that moment to put a government agency on her doorstep. When the CPS worker arrived at our home the next day, we finally understood what we were actually dealing with. The complaint contained 2 specific accusations. First, my husband was an alcoholic with serious anger issues. Second, we were starving our 3 children. There was no food in the house. Let me walk through those one at a time because they deserve to be examined carefully. On Christmas Eve, our entire extended family was in our home, a holiday meal I had spent all day cooking. Eggnog, wine, a warm, full house. Did people drink? Yes, because it was Christmas and family was together and I had made a beautiful meal. But no one in that house got sloppy or inappropriate. No one acted in a way that would justify calling them an alcoholic with anger issues. My husband was calm and patient throughout the entire evening, including the moment with my son, which he handled exactly the way he always handles it, with measured words and genuine care. But someone in that house did drink themselves into the floor. One person consumed an entire 18-pack of beer that night, alone. And that person was not my husband. That person was my sister. When the CPS worker opened our pantry, she stopped. She looked at the shelves, full shelves, organized shelves, enough rice and pasta, and canned goods and fresh food to feed this family for months. And she laughed. A short, surprised exhale. She said there was enough food in this house to feed everyone for 3 months. She said it with the particular tone of someone who had walked into very different kitchens on very different days. She left that afternoon and told us she was grateful to be in a functional home with happy, healthy children. She said it was rare. The case was closed by the end of the day. But the question sitting at the center of all of this, who had the audacity to make that call, was still very much open. CPS doesn't tell you who reported you. It's a protection built into the system, and it exists for legitimate reasons. People need to be able to report genuine concerns without fear of retaliation. But it also means that when someone weaponizes that anonymity against you, you are left to do the detective work yourself. Which is what my family did. My parents and my brother each reached out to my sister independently in the days after the case closed. Not accusatory, just talking, feeling out her reaction, watching what she said and how she said it. And her reaction was its own kind of confession. She spoke about the accusations as if they had merit. She used language that mirrored the complaint almost exactly. She referred to whoever had made the call in careful hypotheticals, but the way she framed those hypotheticals made it clear she was describing herself. She thought it was justified. She thought it was the right thing to do. But beyond the language, there was one detail that broke the case open for me personally. The accusation about food. My sister and her fiancé live an intensely organic lifestyle. Nothing processed, nothing packaged. No chips, no canned goods, no snacks, nothing with GMOs. On Christmas Eve, her fiancé stood in my kitchen and asked me whether I worried about the GMO content of my pasta sauce. My pasta sauce. The jarred sauce I buy from the grocery store because I am a mother of 3 with a full schedule and a household to run, not a contestant on a cooking show. I have rice. I have canned beans. I have pasta, soups, pantry staples, the foundational materials of a functioning home kitchen. I cook from those ingredients every single night. Never order out. But through her lens, through the lens of someone who has decided that anything not certified organic is essentially a form of neglect, my kitchen probably looked like a crime scene. She did not make that call because she genuinely believed my children were hungry. She made it because she looked at my life and found a way to reframe it as evidence of something wrong. The projection was perfect, too perfect to be accidental. My family arrived at the same conclusion independently, each of them, one by one. It was her. It had always been her. Once I stopped asking who and started asking why, things got more complicated and more heartbreaking. My sister cannot have children. Her fiancé is sterile. And my sister had wanted a big family for as long as I had known her. That was the dream she carried, the future she had imagined into vivid detail. A house full of children, holidays overflowing, little faces everywhere. And instead, somewhere along the way, she had been delivered the news that version of her life was not available to her. Not without significant medical intervention. Not without uncertainty. Not without grief. I have watched her grieve that in real time, and I have felt for her. I genuinely have. Because that kind of loss, the loss of a future you had already built in your mind, is not a small thing. It does not resolve with time the way other losses sometimes do. It recurs. Every holiday. Every time she walked into my home and saw my 3 children living the life she wanted for herself. I think for a long time she managed it by loving my kids as her own in the moments she was around them. Being Santa's helper was not nothing. It was something real. I think part of her genuinely believed it was enough, and then somewhere that stopped being enough. There was more. Over the summer, after our mother was diagnosed with breast cancer and recovered, our family went through genetic testing, the BRCA gene. My results came back clear. My sister's came back at high risk. She has been living with that information for months, sitting with the very real possibility of facing the same illness that nearly took our mother. I cannot imagine what that feels like. I have tried to imagine it, and I cannot. The drinking had been escalating for years. It was already a concern before any of this. After the genetic results, it accelerated. On Christmas Eve, while I was cooking a holiday meal for our entire family, she drank 18 beers to herself. I noticed. I said nothing because it was Christmas and I did not want to create a scene. Looking back, I wish I had said something, but I need to be clear about something. Grief does not grant you the right to do what she did. Pain does not entitle you to put a government agency on your sister's doorstep while she is sitting in a hospital wired up to neurological monitors. Jealousy is not a justification. I understand her suffering. I have always understood it. and I refused to let that understanding serve as an excuse for what she chose to do with it. In the days after the case was officially closed, my sister went completely silent. I want you to notice that. The same woman who had been blowing up my phone during the investigation, demanding I call her, asking frantically how the interview went, performing every possible shape of concerned sister, vanished the moment I told her things had gone fine. Not a text, not a voicemail, weeks of nothing, the silence of someone who had wanted a different outcome and was now recalibrating. My brother suggested a lunch. He believed, and I understood his reasoning, that a face-to-face conversation was the appropriate approach, not a text exchange, not a phone call. A table, real people, real accountability, the kind of conversation where you can't close a screen and make the discomfort go away. He thought if we could sit down together, we could get to the truth and maybe, eventually, to something that looked like a path forward. I was less certain. The thought of sitting across a table from her while I was still managing neurological testing, still navigating the loss of my ability to drive, still watching my teenage son occasionally process the memory of being pulled out of class by a government worker. It sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't know if I could do it without falling apart. More importantly, I didn't know if I could do it without saying things that would only make the situation worse. I needed to be careful. I needed to be measured. I had decided that when the confrontation came, I was going to stay calm no matter what she gave me. And then, before we could even finalize the lunch, she reached out. Just a message, brief and soft. She said she loved me. She said she'd been thinking about me, and I knew immediately what those words meant. They meant she had been sitting with what she'd done long enough that the weight of it had become uncomfortable. They meant some part of her needed to surface before she could breathe again. I responded simply. I told her I had one question and I needed her to be honest. She called me immediately. I picked up. My voice was steady. My hands were steady. I had spent weeks grieving the version of my sister that existed before all of this, the one I trusted completely, and in doing that grief work early, I had arrived at this moment clear. I was ready. I told myself I was ready. I just didn't know yet how cold that phone call was going to feel. She opened the call by saying she thought I already knew the answer. And then she said yes, it was her. I want you to hear how she said it, not with guilt. Not with the halting voice of someone finally finding the courage to confess something that had been eating them alive. She said it like a dare, like she was drawing a line and waiting to see if I'd cross it. I think you already know if you're asking. So yes, it was me. No apology in that sentence, not a trace of one. Just the blunt fact, delivered with an edge of challenge, almost of pride. I asked her the only question that had mattered to me for weeks. I said, "Do you realize what could have happened to my kids? Do you understand what could have happened to me and my husband? Do you have any idea how badly this could have gone with a different social worker, a different day, different circumstances, a moment where our house wasn't perfectly in order and my husband wasn't perfectly composed?" And then she exploded. She said I didn't deserve to be a parent. She said I obviously didn't care about my children because I hadn't even brought them up, which was not just untrue but completely backwards, because the very first words out of my mouth had been about my kids. The very first sentence. I believe she was drunk during that call. I believe she was in the same state she had been on Christmas Eve when she consumed 18 beers alone. The same state she may well have been in when she picked up the phone and made that original call to CPS. She ranted. She yelled. She talked over me continuously. She said she cared about my children more than anyone in this family. I want you to sit with that statement for a moment. She cared about my children so much that she attempted to have them removed from the only home they have ever known. That is what her love looked like in practice. Every time I opened my mouth, she got louder. I kept asking calmly, quietly whether I could speak. She kept going. The only words she registered from me were these: "You realize we are going to be taking a very long break from you, right?" Her response was immediate and flat. "I'm sure you will, and I don't care." Then she resumed. I told her twice, plainly, that if she would not let me speak, I was going to hang up. She did not stop. So I did exactly what I said I would do. I hung up the phone. I blocked her number. I set the phone down on the counter and stood in the silence that followed and let the full weight of the last several weeks settle into my body all at once. It was her. It was always her, and she did not care. I called my father immediately after I hung up. I told him what she had said. I told him how she had said it. I described the ranting, the volume, the incoherence. The way her voice had eventually become something unmoored from logic entirely, cycling through accusations and proclamations of love and declarations that she didn't care, all tangled together. I told him it sounded like a manic episode, or alcohol, or both, and that someone needed to reach her before she did something else she couldn't take back. I heard his tone change the moment I said she had admitted it. My father is a measured man, not someone who loses composure in ordinary conversations. But in that moment, I heard something in him shift. The particular sound of a person confronting something they had been hoping desperately was not true. He sounded like he was on the verge of tears, because he is a father watching two of his children standing on opposite sides of a fracture that may never fully close. That is its own kind of grief, and he had not been prepared for it. And then came the next wave, because there is always a next wave. Family members began reaching out, the ones who acknowledged, when pressed, that what she had done was wrong, who did not defend it exactly, but who also felt that she was still my sister. That family was family. That perhaps, at the next gathering, I could find a way to be in the same room with her. That moving forward was the healthy, mature choice. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It felt like being asked to absorb a betrayal and minimize it for the comfort of everyone else in the room. It felt like being handed the labor of forgiveness before the person who had wronged me had done a single hour of the work that real forgiveness requires. It felt like being told that family cohesion mattered more than the safety of my children, more than my own right to decide who I allow back into my home, more than the reality of what had actually happened. My sister knows my address. She knows my children's school. She knows our routines, our schedules, the details of our daily lives. She has demonstrated, concretely and on record, a willingness to use a government agency as a weapon when her emotions get the better of her. Going no contact is not a punishment I am inflicting. It is a boundary I am enforcing, one that every parent in my position has the right and the responsibility to hold. Here is what I keep returning to when I try to make sense of what she thought was going to happen. She thought it was going to work. She looked at my life, at the family she had spent years watching me build, the family she wanted for herself and could not have, and she decided she could dismantle it with a phone call. She framed her own ideology as evidence of neglect. She projected her own drinking onto my husband. She dressed jealousy up as concern and handed it to a government agency. And she thought, on some level, that my children would be removed, that family placement would be prioritized, that they would end up with her. She was wrong about every single part of it. My house was exactly what it has always been. Clean, full, warm, loved. My husband was exactly who he has always been, a steady, patient father who gives his son 10 minutes to cool down and then goes upstairs to have a real conversation. My pantry was full. My children were safe and happy and articulate about both. My son, who had been pulled out of class by a government worker at 13 years old, which is a genuinely disorienting experience for a child, told the truth without hesitation, clearly and completely, because that is who he is, and that is how we have raised him. The CPS worker who walked through our home went home that afternoon grateful. She said it was rare to find a case like ours. That sentence, which should have been ordinary, broke my heart a little, because I know what it implies about how many families genuinely need that intervention, families where the call is real and the danger is real. And someone had taken the mechanism designed to protect those children and used it as a personal weapon, aimed it at a mother recovering from seizures, at a father who was guilty of nothing except being a better partner than the woman on the phone could admit, at children who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Cold karma is not always loud. It doesn't always arrive as a public humiliation or a dramatic reversal. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it looks like this, a case closed in days. An admission delivered without remorse and received with a steady voice. A phone call ended by the person it was meant to destroy. A sister who wanted to fracture a family and instead fractured only her own place within it, her relationship with her parents, her brother, the nieces and nephews she claimed to love above everyone, the holiday traditions she had been part of for years. She lost all of it, every single piece of it, because she chose to pick up that phone. I hope she gets the help she needs. I hope the grief she has been carrying since last summer finds somewhere healthier to go than toward the people who love her. But that work is hers to do, not mine to wait for. If this story hit you somewhere real, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Karma. We're here every day with stories of betrayal, truth, and the justice that always, eventually, finds its way home.